what I define success as a small and mighty investor is meeting all of your financial goals with the least number of properties possible, depending on what your financial goals are. If you want to make $1 million a year, maybe you do need to have a really big portfolio. But if you're like most of the people I interviewed for this book were people who said, you know what, having 60 grand a year, having 100 grand a year, maybe 150 grand a year, like for my rental portfolio, that's like my end goal. And if you want to join the small and mighty club, if you're one property, if you're 100 properties, you can join the club, but it's more about an approach to doing it differently. Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach. And this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Today is a special episode. It is the day that the book, The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor, is available. So if you are listening to this, the book is going to be available on the Bigger Pockets bookstore, which I'll have a link to in the video description if you're watching on YouTube, in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. But this is obviously something, if you've been on my newsletter, if you've been listening to the podcast, I've been talking about a lot. This was a big project for me last year, writing it for about 7 months, and really a movement that I'm just excited to be sharing with, of celebrating the small investors, not the people who have aspirations to own 1,000 units, not that there's anything wrong with that, but the people who want to invest in real estate for lifestyle, for doing what matters, for being with their family, for traveling, for contributing to their community, whatever it is. That's why I wrote the book. And it's a guidebook to help you build that kind of real estate business where you have a lot of free time, where you have free income. And so today's episode is about the book, but we're going to do something a little different. You've heard a lot from me. I talk to you every week on the podcast, and I wanted to flip the tables a little bit. So I have brought on a good friend of mine and a fellow real estate investor named Sean McKay. And Sean is with me. He is featured in the book, actually. So it's kind of appropriate that he is here to interview me and to flip the table. Sean and his wife, Heather, have a history of investing in real estate. He's also been in the financial services industry, has a lot of knowledge of self-directed retirement accounts. And he's kind of my go-to guy when I have questions about using a self-directed retirement account to invest in real estate. And he's also just done rental properties he and his wife have, and have used those to produce income and to do what we're talking about here in the interview. And I want to ask Sean if he would come on and talk to us about the book to help me kind of go behind the scenes. So Sean, thanks for being here. Welcome back. You've been on the podcast before, but welcome back, and thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, Chad, it's great to be here, man. This is really exciting times. This is an absolute incredible book. As you know, your first book is, for me, on the Mount Rushmore of real estate investing books. It's a book that I've gifted to a lot of different people. But I will tell you, this new book, for me, is the GOAT. This is the best real estate book I have ever read. For me, I look at these books and I think a great real estate book has one of a few components. It might have this great storytelling component. It might dig into a specific strategy, or it might kind of condense down a difficult topic and drill down so we feel like we can kind of own the topic. But for me, this book hits all of those marks. And this is a book, regardless of where people are in their investing journey, whether they're just getting started, they're in the meat of it, or they're kind of finishing off how they want their portfolio structured. This for me is a home run, man. I can't say enough good things about this book.
Well, thank you. I have to send you a check later on for saying all those nice things about me. But I appreciate that, and I hope it's going to be helpful. I put my heart and soul into it, and really, not just me. There's stories. The thing I love about it is that there's people like Sean and Heather in the book. There's Karen and Bob. There's just tons and tons of stories. But you know me, and you know this podcast. If you're listening to this, we've got to get into the details and the graphs and the metrics and how do you do this and the step-by-step processes. So. But enough from me. Sean, I'm going to let you take over the show. This is like you're taking over the steering wheel for the podcast, and I'm going to be the interviewee. You're interviewing it, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously the book is titled The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. And so, Chad, when you are defining that out, when you're thinking about that concept, are there certain metrics for cash flow or the amount of units that we need to have in order to be considered a small and mighty investor? Is it kind of just a general thought process? How do you think about that?
Yeah, small is one of those tricky words, isn't it? Where for some people, small and as a real estate investor might be one property. For another person, they might be, well, I'm a lot smaller because I have 100 properties and somebody else has 1,000. So in the book, I do define what a small and mighty investor means to me. And so let me unpack it a little bit. To me, a small and mighty investor is a philosophy, first and foremost. It's an approach to real estate investing. And the approach basically says this, is that instead of trying to maximize the number of units you own, that's your, like, let's say that's your goal, is like to maximize, go 10x and get the biggest you can, like that's success. What I define success as a small and mighty investor is meeting all of your financial goals with the least number of properties possible. So that least number of properties possible is the key component of it. It's the most elegant solution, the most efficient solution, the most simple solution. But it's also going to be depending on what your financial goals are. If you want to make $1 million a year, maybe you do need to have a really big portfolio. But if you're like most of the people I interviewed for this book were people who said, you know what, having 60 grand a year, having 100 grand a year, maybe 150 grand a year, like for my rental portfolio, that's like my end goal. And what I try to show in the book is that for what a small and mighty investor can mean working it backwards, depending on where you are in the country and the price ranges you're in. That could be 5 properties, that could be 10 properties, that could be 15 properties. Like that's the kind of sweet spot for most of the small mighty investors that I've interviewed, that I've studied in this book. But there's some range there. And if you want to join the small and mighty club, we'll take, if you're 1 property, if you're 100 properties, you can join the club, but it's more about an approach to doing it differently. Like I think maximizing has its place, growing and getting as big as you can has its place, but I'm trying to make a place and a movement around minimizing and simplifying so that you have time to do what matters to you. So that you have the time is the key component. That's the first paragraph in the book in my introduction, was saying that isn't it amazing that people get really rich and wealthy and yet they have so little time? Like, why is that? Like, isn't the time the most valuable thing? Isn't that why we got in this thing in the first place? And so I try to build a business model. And this is what I've grappled with for the last 20 years is how can I build a real estate model that not only produces the income you want, but sometimes you have to make some different moves, some different strategy moves in order to also have a lot of time. And so that simplicity is key, is that you have to have some systems and some teams and some things we can talk about, but also just simplifying it as much as possible gives you a leg up to having that free time that you always wanted to get in the first place.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so, as you know, and as we've had conversations, there's definitely been a lot of emphasis and a lot of celebrating, scaling these big portfolios, right? So, whether it's different investing platforms, whether it's just in different real estate communities, you find that people are kind of defining the hierarchy of people's lives and of their businesses by how many units they have and things like that. So, as you know, it's very unique that you're kind of going against the grain in that way, and you're celebrating this idea of the efficient portfolio and the portfolio serving you and what you want for your life and for your interests and what have you. So was that kind of, for you, was that something where you were deliberate in wanting to give the other side of the coin, or how did that work for you as you thought about delivering this book?
Yeah, it was a couple things. There's certainly a competitive part of me that says, I'm just frustrated by advice out there. Not that it's bad advice. Like there's no such thing as like, that's wrong to try to get 1,000 units. What sort of frustrated me though was, and this was advice I got as an investor early in my career, it's sort of underneath the undercurrent of this advice is that if you want to be successful, if you want to hold yourself as a successful investor, if you want to achieve all these things that you want, like having free time and going on vacations and traveling, like you can anytime you hear somebody promoting real estate, you probably heard all those things, they promoted them, and then the undercurrent, the assumption there was, if you want to do all that, you got to go big. Like those two things went together. And actually, I took the bait. Like I did that. As an early investor, sometimes you just have to say, I don't know that much. I just got to copy this person. And so I started borrowing goals from other people and flipping a bunch of houses. And I copied somebody who wanted to was successfully flipping 50 houses per year. And so we kind of modeled after that person early in our first or second year in business. We started going out and acquiring a lot of properties, flipping a lot of houses. But then we also started buying rental properties, and it was just go big, get more, build systems, outsource things, scale. That was sort of the mantra. And I read some books pretty early in my career, right before the Great Recession. One was like the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, about having an efficient kind of business model and traveling and going on many retirements. And I was like, wow, that's what I want. Like, that was just like kind of the lifestyle piece. And then I read the Building Wealth One House at a Time by John Schaub, which was pretty much the first time I'd seen somebody say, well, it's actually better to be simpler. You can have more lifestyle. And he kind of gave a business model for that with single family houses. And then I also read books in the personal finance realm, like Your Money or Your Life, which had this concept of, there's this graph where, the more clutter you get in your life, and this could be in like your personal finances too, like the more, if you get a big house and you get a extra car and you get a boat, like your happiness, like on those early purchases, when you buy that luxury food or something, it makes you a lot happier. But as you get more and more stuff, like the happiness kind of starts flattening out and even going down some, because you have clutter and you have just stuff kind of weighing you down. So all of that to be said, I kind of had like a aha moment where my business partner and I shifted our business model because of just a little frustration. It's like, this is not, like, I'm busy. I'm doing all these things. Is this really the end destination I want to point towards? And some of those books helped me, motivate me to say, let's build a business around being simpler and smaller. And that sort of evolved into, I didn't call it the Small and Mighty Investor at that point, but we were definitely in a fork in the road in 2007-08, where we saw the Great Recession. We're like, all right, we can either like grow out of this problem or we can simplify out of this problem. And we chose to simplify out of it. And I had other people giving me advice. I talk about that in the book. One of my mentors, Dr. Stone, Louis Stone, was a private lender of mine. And he said things like, Chad, you could go out and buy a lot more properties and get like 10 more private lenders. But then how much attention are you going to be giving me? And how much are you going to really be taking care of me? You're going to have to hire somebody else to help you do this. Why don't you just like take care of like a few people and just do that really well? And that was kind of an aha moment. Okay, that's a good idea. And my business partner was another, mentor to me. Tommy is his name, and he also said, I don't think we need to grow out of this. I think we need to like just simplify, systematize. Let's make this work. So all that to be said, my motivation was like firsthand experience, being in the trenches. Just my gut feel was this was a better approach. And it's grown into something more, though, as it worked for me. But as I started writing about it and telling people about it, I just realized that there's other people like me who also want to do a little bit simpler business model. And that's where some of the frustration came into, just seeing a lot of the way success is painted as being bigger is better, more is better. More power to you. That's great. Like if the end result of business success is to be Elon Musk for you and have this huge operation and like that's the top of the ladder, great. I'm just trying to paint another top of the ladder, which is somebody who might have 5 properties they're paid for and they make $60,000 a year and they spend an hour per week or less on their real estate and they're traveling the world, or they're coaching their little kids in their little league and they're the one who's actively involved as a parent in their school, or their grandparents and they're getting involved and they're volunteering. Like that's success. Like that, it's not as easy to quantify that, but that's the kind of success that I started noticing the people I really respected had. And those were the people, the rental investors I noticed, who were the most at peace, the least stressed. Like the go stuff is great for a while, but I see more the growth phase as sort of a means to an end. You do have to put some time in. Like this isn't like you can't put the work in kind of business model. Just because it's small, just because it's simple, doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. There's going to be some challenges, but at the end goal though is to be simpler, to be smaller, and that I have personally experienced the benefits of that, being able to travel with my family. We're just wrapping up a 12-month trip living in Spain. My 2 kids went to school here. My wife's been volunteering and teaching English and doing different things here. I've been playing basketball and taking Spanish lessons and doing different stuff. So like that's what matters to me, and also writing a book like this. And so I'm trying to share my own story, but also show that other people, hey, this is a different path. The Small and Mighty path, the Go Big 10X path, both can be legitimate, but I'm trying to show that people, hey, here's another way to do it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And, it's interesting because for those that are willing to put in the work and they're willing to learn and they're willing to speak to sellers and market and manage properties, as we know, it's, once you get your portfolio to a certain position, it can be fairly passive. But in order to get that just a little bit of scale so that you have some cash flow and some assets, there is, as we know, some work there. And so what I really appreciate about what you cover in the book is, you do talk about the fact that it takes a level of intensity to be building and to be growing. But then, as you said, you also have to keep some context for your life. And there needs to be kind of this constant almost analysis of weighing different things out. I remember hearing Seth Klarman, who ironically is more on the equity side, but he talks a lot about how early in his career he saw different kind of like gods, if you will, on Wall Street that had made billions of dollars, but their health was abysmal. They didn't have relationships with family members, and that's not what he wanted. And so he built kind of a different type of private equity type of firm, and there's a little bit more balance in his life. And they've still done incredibly well, and I believe he's a billionaire and all that fun stuff. But there was almost a bit of a small and mighty approach to it, right? It's not we're going to be the biggest firm in Wall Street. We're going to do it the way we want to do it. So, I think that it's great to hear someone, as I've always said to you, you kind of have it mixed up in the content creation world. I think a lot of content creators, their personal experience is a little bit limited, but yet they talk a lot about scale and, never-ending growth and things like that, versus you've built a far more substantial portfolio than what you share with us that we actually need in order to maybe get where we want to go. So the one question I've actually haven't had an opportunity to ask you recently is, you talked about early in your career the fact that you and Tommy were really cranking out. You were buying a lot of properties in a short period of time. Do you have concerns about those investors that maybe to a degree have kind of blinders on and they're all about unit count and they're really cranking and they're buying 20, 50, 60 units in their first 12, 24 months? Is that a little bit concerning for you?
Yeah, and the cool thing about growth is that you can accomplish anything you want in the world. Even if you're like, hey, I don't want to have 10 properties, I want to have 500. Like, even if that was your number, you can accomplish anything you want if you give yourself enough time and if you give yourself a process that's going to be more likely to succeed. The thing that does concern me, and one of the reasons I think the go big approach, if you followed it blindly, can be a little dangerous, is that debt is a big part of the equation. And I'm a fan of debt. Like I'm not like a Dave Ramsey, 100% you need to not use debt to buy real estate. Like I do like paying off debt, which we can talk about. Like eventually, I think once you go through your journey, you've built a number of properties, it makes sense to start paying some debt off. That's one of the ways you stay small. Instead of reinvesting that money into more properties, is you plow it back, or to use a poker metaphor, you take some chips off the table, you plow some of your profits back, some of your savings back into paying a debt off that then increases your income, it reduces your risk. And that risk thing is the thing that's not talked about much in the just grow, get as fast as you can, because that's, of all the people I've known in real estate investing who've failed and gone out of business, I can only think of people who had debt problems. I know there's other problems that could happen. You could get sued by your tenant. You could have other things that go wrong, right? But I've only heard about people who couldn't make their debt payments. And is either the Great Recession and they had, the rents dropped in some places, but not that much, or they had interest rates that reset and now their payments are really high, or they had what's called a balloon note where they had a bunch of money that they owed to the bank. And, in the good times, all those kind of things that can go wrong with your debt, the banker's like, oh no, we'll give you another loan when the balloon comes. Don't worry about that. Or, oh yeah, I'll solve that. I'll pay that loan off in 3-4 years. There's always optimism on what can happen, but being a risk mitigator, so thinking about the best thing that could happen, but also thinking about the worst thing that can happen. That's what I like to plug into that growth equation, is that you can grow as much as you want, but give yourself a set of boundaries, a set of rules that you don't break. And I actually have that in the book. That's called the seven, the coach's seven safe debt rules. And so I can share a couple of those just to give you an example of what that means. For example, you could spend every bit of the cash you have to go buy the next property as a down payment, right? But wouldn't it be smarter to have a cash reserve fund for each property you buy? So you buy property number one, you set aside $5,000 in a cash reserve account, just in case, rainy day, what if the heating and air goes out? It gives you a little bit of a cushion, so you're not just panicking, having to go put money on credit cards. So that's property number one. You buy property number two, you set aside another $5,000. You buy property number three, and then maybe you change to a different kind of game plan. Maybe you set aside 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So you add up like your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, all that, your maintenance, and say, all right, that's what a monthly expense is on my 5 properties. I'm going to have 6 months of that just to be conservative. Well, what that does, that's just one of the safe debt rules. But what that does is it sort of limits your growth. It's going to make you slow down because you're self-imposing a conservativeness on your approach. And yes, does that mean you're going to buy fewer properties this year? Probably. But does that mean you're going to do it in a way that makes you more resilient and safer, and so that you have the strong foundation, and then in year 2 and year 3, you can build on that foundation. It's like a big skyscraper, right? You could go a skyscraper into outer space if you build a strong enough foundation. And so that's sort of the approach that I like to give people is like, let's build a solid foundation. Let's buy properties with conservative cash set aside. Let's make sure we don't use really risky debt that has a balloon note coming due in 3 to 5 years that you have to pay the entire amount of the note, and you're depending on the goodwill of a bank, which is kind of oxymoron, to give you a loan when it's a really bad time. And so like those are some of the ideas that like if you self-impose that kind of growth, you can still get as big as you want. But what you might find is that, oh, wait a minute, I've got enough. Like I'm at 10 properties, I'm at 20 properties. Let me sell a few properties, pay off some debt. That kind of, you have time to think about your strategy, but you know you're not going to slide backwards because you've implemented some safety measures into your growth equation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you said, those debt rules that you're really thorough with in the book, as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking to the points in our journey that have been the most stressful. And it's been when we didn't adhere to what our version of those debt rules were. And a lot of times we would get a little bit too concerned about the growth component, but we weren't as concerned as we needed to be with cash reserves per units. And, everyone can have a slightly different metric, but it is, we live in a real world and things are dynamic and it's so helpful to have this kind of constructed in the way that it is. Because I think for so many of us, you get caught up in the moment sometimes, and sometimes we think that we're smarter than we are because we're seeing appreciation in our properties. We're seeing that, we haven't had some huge capital expenditures lately with roofs and HVACs and things like that. And so you kind of extrapolate that maybe a little bit too far out in the future. I'll never have an HVAC issue or anything like that. So I do appreciate the way that you're showing us a path to how to create that financial freedom, but doing it in a pretty manageable way. And so another thing that I've never really asked you too much about is, you mentioned earlier, you have this long-term partnership with your business partner, Tommy. And I have to tell you, I can't think of another investor I've met that has had a long-term partnership other than perhaps a spouse that works in the business where it's actually gone well, essentially. So I got to ask you, I've never asked you this. What do you think has been unique about your relationship, your working relationship with Tommy that's allowed you guys to sustain and to build a strong foundation and a quality portfolio? Because that is the unicorn of unicorns as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think it is. And I don't think I thought about it that much when we got into the partnership, just to be straight up with you. But I will have a funny story that my first year in business, when Tommy and I were just thinking about becoming partners, I went to a seminar, and it was with one of the most prominent teachers. And I was sort of an aggressive learner. And after class, everybody's walking to lunch. I'm like, I'm going to go sit at the lunch table with this guy. And sure enough, my dad and my dad was there at the conference with me. We sat at the lunch table. It was the 3 of us. We were just sitting there having lunch. And he's like, well, tell me about yourself. What are you doing? And I said, well, I'm starting a partnership with this guy named Tommy. We're going to buy properties. And I've learned a lot from you. Thank you about the marketing and finding deals. And he's like, well, what's your partner bringing to the table? What do you bring to the table? And like, neither one of us had any money. And he's like, neither one of you have any money? And I was like, no, neither one of us have any money. And he's like, so one of you must be really experienced. And I was like, no, neither one of us is really experienced. And he's like, your partnership is going to fail. I said, "Oh, well, thank you. You must know a lot more than I do." I'm glad I didn't listen to that person, and I'm sure he meant well. And he probably does know the statistics that most partnerships don't work out in business, kind of like marriages probably as well. There's bad odds in some marriage statistics, right? But when you get married, you go look at the divorce statistics. No, like you got to have some optimism. But in our case, there was some luck to it, but the thing that's been really great about Tommy is that we both have similar aspirations. And I think coming back to the small and mighty investor, the luck was that we both wanted to be small and mighty investors, and that we had the lifestyle and the simplicity kind of built in. And I didn't know that at the time, but maybe it was built in. He's a trustworthy person. I knew that from the beginning. He was a good friend of mine. We went to conferences and learned together. We both went to Clemson University, where we both still live in town there, and we both like playing basketball. Like when we play pickup basketball, I always pass it out to him, and he's my 3-point shooter, and I'm just the hardworking rebounder who like passes it to other people who can actually make shots. So just as an aside, if you play sports with somebody, whether you're a golfer or a basketball player or I don't know, like pickleball or whatever, you can tell a lot about somebody when you play sports with them. So that's just sort of some practical advice. Maybe you should be on their team in a way that's not that the stakes aren't very high before you go into a business partnership with them. And we had played plenty of basketball together, so that's my advice on picking him in the first place. But I think trustworthiness and alignment of the goals, and then just humility. Like I'm not saying I'm that humble, but Tommy is a humble enough person that he doesn't have to take credit. Like he is definitely given at least 50%, probably more, of the partnership to our success, and he never tries to take credit for it. Like that's the kind of person you really feel lucky if you can work with that kind of person, because then nobody's trying to take all the credit. Like you're just saying, how can we make this work? How can we make each other better? How can we support each other? And I think a lot of that, for me, came from sports. I was always a team sports player, and I just saw how when you do well as a team, it's never 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like 1 + 1 = 5. Like you bring something else extra to the party when you have a good partnership. And it's hard. Like building a good team is really hard. But I actually was fortunate enough as well to have, my mom was not in the real estate space necessarily with a partnership, but she had a business partnership with her brother. And 30 years they'd had a small business as dentists together, and I just saw that they made it work, and they're family members and they communicated well. One of them kind of would do one part of the business sometimes when needed and had a difficult conversation with an employee. So having modeling from my uncle and my mom was really helpful, just to counteract that advice I got from the guru that your business is going to fail, your partnership is going to fail. I was like, well, I don't know. My mom's been in business for 25, 30 years with my uncle, and they seem to make it work. So I had that seed of optimism at least, but I was lucky in some of the execution of that. That just happened to be with a partner who had a lot of those qualities that panned out.
Yeah, I think there's really something to be said too for that optimism. I've found the full-time entrepreneurs that I've had privilege to spend time with, I do find that you guys as a group very much tend to be optimistic, and sometimes overly optimistic in terms of outcomes and things of that nature, which, it's kind of a weird pivot into this question, because I think that, in the summer of 2023, as we sit, there's been a lot more concern over the last 6, maybe 12 months in terms of, the real estate investing landscape and where we are kind of macro and in the market cycle and things of that nature. And, I know you and I are both having conversations with investors. I find especially those that are kind of just getting started in their journey, where I hear a lot of, well, I'm not going to get started in real estate until there's some massive pullback or there's some sort of crash in the real estate market. And so I guess kind of from a few different angles, you were heavily invested pre-2008, so you guys had already built a pretty substantial portfolio. Obviously, you guys survived 2008, and so you've seen kind of the full market cycle there. How do we think, if we're new to real estate investing, do you think that that's a valid approach, kind of waiting for the bottom to fall out? Did you guys spend a lot of time early in your journey thinking about kind of the macro and where you were in the market cycle. Like, how do we think about those things in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to the people who are nervous about, hey, is the market going to change? Is it going to collapse? Am I going to be stuck with a property and a bunch of debt? And I mean, it's legitimate to be concerned. So like, I get it. Like, I think that's fine, and I think it's good for you. The fact that you're nervous and afraid, like that fear is a tool. It's a good thing. It's kind of telling you either need to be educating yourself more, or it's telling you to be careful. Like it's telling you something. But the question is like, what should you learn from that fear of investing in a market like 2023? Like that's the question. And most people are the answer you told me that a lot of people do give is like, I'm just going to wait. I saw 2009 and the market fell out, and that was the best opportunity. And I think we're all kind of spoiled by being so recent. We have that recency bias of 2008 and 9, where there's a lot of people who got started in 2008, 9, and 10 who honestly just got lucky. Like they just happened to be starting in 2008, 9, and 10. They did well, right? It was the easiest time to buy a property that made cash flow. That's on the one hand. Like so, the real estate itself, this is a key fundamental, didn't change. So you always have the sticks and bricks, the building, the brick, the framing of the building. You always have this location, right? So buying a property in Metro Atlanta, where I'm from, that didn't change. Like the streets were there, the houses were there, the fact that people want to be close to a park and close to a downtown, like those are the fundamentals of real estate. Why do people want to live in a certain place? That's the same. And that didn't change in 2008 and 2009. What changed was the financing. And so real estate always has two components. There's the sticks and the bricks in the real estate. There's the financing. And to be a good real estate investor, for people who are nervous about what's going on in 2023, my recommendation is, this is something I talk about a lot in the book, study the fundamentals of what it means to buy good real estate. And there's two components. There's the sticks and the bricks, the location, where it is, the property itself. And so you want to have a really good idea of what it is that makes a good property. And I call that a buy box. That's not a concept I invented. Somebody else, it's been used by a lot of investors. But the clearer you can get on the type of property you want to buy, the location you want to buy in, and you evaluate based on demand. Where do people want to live in your community? Are you in a region of the country where population is increasing? So there's a lot of fundamentals. You can study this just like you study science or math or anything else. You can study good real estate locations and good real estate properties. So that's part one. And that hasn't changed. 2023, 2022, 2008, I don't care what year you're in, that is the same. The fundamentals that you evaluate about real estate is the same. The thing that changes, and the reason we have economic cycles, is the debt, is the financing. And so the challenge of 2023, just like it'll be a new challenge in 2024, 2025, and just like it was in 2008 and 9 for me and other people, was when it's really easy to buy good real estate, it's really hard to get good money. It's really hard to get good interest rates. Like in 2008 and 9, banks weren't loaning that much money. Like they were hurting. They were all pulling their money in. So if you had cash, if you had availability of private lenders, if you had really good credit, and you could get a couple loans, then it was a field day. You had a field day. Well, 2023 is not the same as 2008, but it's kind of similar in that the real estate's still good. There's still some places with wonderful long-term fundamentals, but all of a sudden the interest rates have gone up, and it seems like it's more difficult to make cash flow. And so the challenge, again, just like in 2008 and 9, you had to figure out alternative ways to get the money, not going to banks, using private lenders, using cash, things like that. Well, in 2023, it's kind of similar. Like if you just want to go to the bank, plop down 20% and make the property cash flow, it's not going to be quite as simple as that. You can still do it. Maybe you have to put a larger down payment. And maybe if you don't have the money, you need to bring in a partner who has more money. So maybe together you can put a larger down payment such that you now have a positive cash flow or a little bit of cash flow. And maybe you have to give up half your deal or part of your deal to your partner in order to make a deal work. Like, wouldn't you rather have half of a deal than 0% of nothing? Like I would always rather take half of a deal. So partnerships are one specific idea where you could have somebody else bring more cash to the table to make a deal that might be a little harder to cash flow because of the high interest rates, but it's still a really good property. Like use that partner to help you leverage this to get this deal. And then later on, if interest rates go down or if you get a better deal with another lender, you can refinance it. That's the kind of outside the box thinking, whether it's partnerships, using seller financing. That's been a big tool for me, is negotiating with sellers, finding retiring landlords who no longer want to manage their property, and yet they might be willing to lease option it to you or seller finance it to you. They're not going to be advertising, hey, I'll seller finance this property to you, but you can learn to negotiate, which is another thing I talk about in the book. You can learn to solve people's puzzles. It's called the negotiation puzzle, and listening to them and figuring out what are they trying to accomplish. And all of these things, like, here's the key: to make it work in most real estate markets, you've got to be more professional. You've got to work on your skills. You've got to read books like this to learn the skills of other successful investors. It's not always easy. There's some kind of cost to success. And what we've been kind of spoiled in the last few years, where in certain markets you could buy a property, get a traditional loan at the bank, which is easy. You just go use your credit, you put a down payment, there you go, and properties cash flowed. Like that happened in 2000, especially in 2013, 14, 15, 16. Got a little harder later, but a low interest rate environment creates a little different. It's unusual. Like, we have the historical context of low interest is different. We're getting into a little bit more of a normal, in my opinion, kind of real estate dynamic where it's challenging. You have to work a little harder, use creative financing, use private money, use seller financing, use larger down payments, but deals can still be made today. And I would not encourage people just to sit on the sidelines. I think my preference is to always be buying. If you're in the growth phase, always be buying, always be looking for deals. You might buy less in a tougher market than you would in a really easier market to buy in, but you're still buying, because if you stop looking, it's going to take a long time to kind of build up the networking and the relationships and the lead generation. You've got to have this little small and mighty machine going at all times, so that you can then you'll start seeing the opportunities once you get in the game. And it really is like wearing different glasses. Like, it's typically the financing that unlocks your deal. And that's why I spent 3 chapters in the book on financing, because it's such a challenging part of the business for some people to get their head around these alternatives. But if you get it, once you get the financing, it unlocks a ton of opportunities, whether it's 2023, 2008, 9, like the pros in real estate, the pro small and mighty investors, they get financing, and they see it as a toolbox that they continually improve on so that they can adapt to the market wherever it goes. That was a long-winded response. I think I went all over the place there, but that's the way I think about it.
No, that was great. And so, when we're looking at investing, we're looking at our area. I heard you on a call recently where you were talking about when you're studying your geographical area, you need to look at what the supply of real estate looks like. So if you're in an area where it is almost purely single family centric, but you want to buy a 200 unit apartment complex, that may be a little bit of square peg into a round hole type of thing, right? So there's kind of some foundational homework that you're outlining for us in terms of understanding the game you're playing, where you're playing it, how you're playing it, sort of thing. But with that said, and ironically, this book is The Small and Mighty Investor. What I've also always seen from people like yourself that have built these quality portfolios is that there's kind of this foundation of what you want and what is kind of the avatar of a quality property to add to your portfolio. But I guess my question for you is, when we have those anomalies, those post 2008 scenarios where there's more opportunities than there would typically be for someone who's, let's say, in the meat of their investing career. So they've acquired some assets, they have a pretty good understanding of how to analyze properties, things like that. Would you be somebody who would look at kind of interesting situations? So for example, it seems like the last 3 to 5 years has been all about apartment complexes. And that's certainly not the small and mighty model. But if there's some mega opportunity because of, unfortunately, just not the right financing structure, et cetera, with these deals, would you ever actually look at those types of opportunities and doing it in scale and maybe raising money and doing that whole syndication thing? Is that something that would ever be interesting to you?
Probably not. I'm thinking of a few different things. Like what I heard in your question, a couple things. One, the last part of it, would I personally, or maybe somebody's in the middle of their career, consider going into like using a form of raising money called syndication, which is not my expertise. It's not something I've done personally. I've definitely considered it because what syndications mean is you buy a little bit larger deals, and you as the operator, the entrepreneur, usually you have a couple more people on your team. You go out and find properties that are worth $10 million, $20 million, $50 million, big deals that you don't have enough capital to knock down by yourself. But then you go raise money from 100 people, 200 people who each put in, $50,000 or $100,000 to go out and buy that deal together. And so you then, as the syndicator, get a cut of that. Like, what a wonderful way to make money if you have the skills and the knowledge and the expertise. It really is a win-win for the operator because you are using the leverage of all your partners, all their money, to go out and hopefully you have some money in the deal too, but you're using the leverage of all their money to go out and buy these really big assets, and then you get a cut of that really big asset. So talk about getting wealthy really fast. Like you can, it's a way to grow, and so it's legitimate. That's a legitimate way, and it also adds value to those investors who are the syndicate, the limited partners who are investing with you. So all of that being said, like legitimate, good business model. I know there's good operators out there. It's complicated. Like that, being able to understand how to be a good operator to run that requires a lot of moving parts. It requires big, different types of financing. It requires different types of risk. You as the operator often have to be at risk on some loans. I know there's different variability there, but leave it to be said that it's a different ball game than being a small and mighty investor. Buying a single family house, a duplex, a fourplex, much simpler game. There's some pluses and minuses of that, but if you were just trying to get in the game and trying to be consistently buying properties, I think it's enough. You can just buy single family duplexes, fourplexes, mobile homes, maybe 10 unit buildings. Like I've gotten up to, we made a purchase of 28 units at one time, at one purchase. That was the biggest purchase we ever made, but it was not the first purchase we made. We were doing what you said. We adapted our strategy, but we had to use a little bit different financing. We used a commercial loan instead of like a private loan because we had to get a lot more money to buy a $1.1 million property than we did buying a $200,000 property. So yes, I think it's important to adapt your strategy and know if you're ready to go to the little bit bigger deals, that's reasonable, right? I mean, the sky's the limit if you take your time and you're conservative so like we were in a place when we bought the 28 unit where I had been buying single family houses and duplexes and all this stuff for years. And I just happened to be in a market, it's a college student market that I'd studied, I knew the locations, and just a good deal came along. That's a little bit bigger than I normally look at, but I said, this has got a ton of potential. Like this has got the zoning underneath it's really interesting. The cash flow potential is good. So I was ready. I see that more as like I was not a freshman in school. I was like a junior, a senior in school, and I was ready to take on a senior project. That's the way I look at bigger deals. On the other hand, mentors of mine like John Schaub say, hey, you could just make it big your entire career on single family houses. So I would encourage you to know yourself, know the market you're in. I'm not saying syndications are bad either. I'm just saying I've read these like 100-page syndication packages as a potential limited investor in some of their deals. And they basically told me for 50 pages all these things that could go wrong and how the operator's going to get out of it. If it goes wrong, it's not our fault. It's just you're going to lose your money and you're going to be in it with 100 other people in this partnership and it's complicated. So I personally think we have a better competitive advantage as small and mighty investors buying a single family house, a duplex. Like it's not that hard to understand whether a house is in a good location or it's not in a good location. It's not that hard to understand that getting a 30-year fixed loan and buying it such that the rent covers all of that loan and all your expenses. And if you just hold on to that, it's probably going to go up in value on a good location. Like that's simple. You don't have to be a rocket science to figure that out. And I go back to like Warren Buffett always says, keep it simple. Like he only buys things that he understands. And so I think all of us very easily can understand small properties. We can very easily understand how they operate. We can understand how to finance them. We can manage them really easily. You can find tenants who are very self-sustaining, who can take care of the property for you, as a single family house in particular, who will stay for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in some cases. That's amazing. So the simplicity of that, it gets kind of overlooked. In all the world of syndications and 1,000 units, it's easy to overlook the little single family house or the little simple duplex and say, oh, that's kind of the baby toy. We're going to move past the baby toy and go to the big multi-unit properties and the syndications and kind of look down on the single family house. No, like that's the tool. Like that's the thing that can get you to whatever you want. You just got to do that little simple tool 10 times. 15 times, 20 times, and you can be just as successful. And going back to my original point, you might be more successful if you measure how much money you make and how much free time you have and how much peace of mind you have and how much simplicity you have. That's a story I wrote in the book that I'll let people read it. It's in the first chapter, where it compared a syndicator to a person who had like 50 units to a person who had 10 units. And I want you to read the story and see what you think about it. But you can probably imagine who the hero of my story was the person who had that kind of the little portfolio that everybody overlooks. They were the ones who had the most success in my book in the end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's certainly the conclusion that my wife and I have come to is simple, straightforward, as few moving parts as possible, back to your original comments today with an elegant portfolio, as you said, and that makes a lot of sense. So for the purposes of this tribe that you've constructed and you continue to build, so we're sticking with this core small and mighty concept. Have you found, and you've worked with probably now thousands of investors and, through your personal network and students over the last couple of decades, do you find that there are certain characteristics or traits that you find typically amongst those that have done a great job building, whether it's the 5, the 10, the 20 unit portfolio that's just really solid and sharp? Are there any kind of takeaways or things that we can kind of mirror or add to our daily repertoire so that we can also kind of fit that mold?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hobby of mine is studying successful people. And some of those people are very unknown. Nobody knows about them. They have 5 rental units and they have paid them off and they're just living off the rental income. And I ask myself, like, what did that person do well? Like, what were some of the principles? And I could probably boil it down to a few. And I think one of those is having, and this is probably consistent with any business venture you take on, is having a pretty strong vision of where you're trying to go. And I call that doing what matters, because I feel like the emotional tug of that why, that vision that's like your battery. Like that's your superpower. That's the energy that's going to get you past a lot of challenges. Like I don't want to be like sugarcoating this whole thing. Like this is a challenging thing. Like if it were so easy, everybody in the world would do it. It's not easy, but that's okay. Like if it were easy, you don't want it to be easy because you're going to rise to the occasion. Like so, I think the quality, either you need to have that or you need to develop it, of having a really exciting vision for your life. And I can't tell you what that is. That's why like do what matters is a very malleable concept. Like for me, it's traveling with my family, not having to go work for a corporation. Like in college, I played on football. And it was a big organization. We had meetings all the time that I felt like were a waste of time. Like, why are we meeting about this? Like, I remember one time I made A's in most of my classes. That's my thing. And I had a meeting to help me organize my notebook. I was like, really? A meeting to help me organize my notebook? This is ridiculous. But I had to be there. And like, that's corporate life for me, right? That's just like the comedy of having things that control your life. And that's one of the reasons I got into real estate instead of going some other paths. I was like, I can make a lot more money doing those things. That's a more traditional path, but wow, like I can drive around in my car and try to make some money. This is exciting. Like this is free. It's up to me. And so I think the secret though is the entrepreneurs, there's a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of moments you doubt yourself. And so that why, that really strong vision of why you're doing this is what's going to keep you focused in the end. So that's number one. Number two, I would say this is something I talk about in the book as well. Is what I had in the second chapter. I have the characteristics of a small and mighty investor, or I talk about a small and mighty investor as like a superhero. Like what are the skills or what are the characteristics of a small and mighty investor? And one of those is that they see themselves as a craftsperson. So a craftsperson. So think about like a carpenter who's an excellent carpenter. They're somebody who it never stops trying to get better as a good carpenter. A carpenter has their toolbox. They know how to use these tools. I think about an old school carpenter who would build a house almost by their hands, And we have power tools as well. But a carpenter, a craftsperson, an artist, a singer, musician, a creator, like whatever you want to think about, those people like care about the craft, like the details of being good, and the success of their music career or the house they build or whatever it is they do is a direct result in how much they make themselves better and they work on their own skills. And so I'm a self-improvement nut. Like I always have been. It's just been for whatever reason, I was kind of oriented that way. So you've got to be a person who's voraciously reading books, listening to podcasts, getting information where you can, with the intention of making yourself a better investor. Like I really believe that you're the number one asset. Like you personally, your skills, your relationships, your ability to communicate with people has a direct relationship on how much wealth you'll build, how much value you'll add to other people. And so if you have a vivid vision, like a really strong why, if you are committed to mastery, to like mastering the process of being a rental investor, which is not going to happen overnight. You can't be like a quick fix. I'm going to be the best in 3 months. You can get really good in 3 months. You can get a lot better in 3 months. But you got to be committed to the long run. That's the quality number 2 that I've seen. They're crafts, small and mighty investors who are successful are craftspeople. And then the third one, I think there's an orientation towards failure that a lot of people have, because we're all going to fail. We're going to have problems. We're going to have markets. We're going to have all these plans that we thought were really good, and then maybe they were good, but then the market smacks us upside the head and we lose money or something happens. Like I've lost money on deals. I've bought properties that I just messed up. And so that number one, we should acknowledge that's going to happen. It's going to happen. That's okay. But B, if you have this orientation where you failing means you are a failure, therefore I'm just going to like pout and be dejected and never get back in the game, you're not going to make it. This is an entrepreneurial game. You've got to get back up. You've got to see it as a challenge. A lot of that though is not just putting it all on yourself. It's having a network. I really believe in a team. And so in the book I have a chapter on building your team. And yes, you need property managers. Yes, you need a good handyman. Yes, you need a good electrician. Those are critical. But like your inner circle is if you have a partner or a spouse, a significant other, like that's your number one. Like you're not going to make it through those challenges just kind of going along on your own. You got to have your family, your inner circle. And that's a challenge for some people. You might have family members who aren't very supportive of what you're trying to do there. There's no easy fix there. Like you got to figure that out. Maybe they're skeptical because in the past you haven't followed through on things. Maybe you have to have a good conversation. Maybe you have to prove yourself in small ways before you can prove yourself in big ways. That's not a Band-Aid you can put over that. Like you have to have your inner circle, like that inner circle of your partner, your spouse, if you have one, or a mentor, or a network of real estate people who you meet with regularly. I know you do that, Sean, in Charlotte. I'm still a member of the Upstate South Carolina Real Estate Investor Association. Like that's my tribe. That's my people. There's been tough times when I've had a hard time being able to call them or talk to them or go to a meeting and just hang out and just be supported by other people who have similar weird goals to you is critical. So like that community of people can kind of fill you up when you get knocked down, which is going to happen. And if you don't have that, then the lone wolf thing doesn't work. Like you have to build it with other people. You got to have a team around you. And so I think those are the 3 things that came to mind for me, is that just being really clear about why you're doing this, be motivated. Number 2, having a craftsman mindset that you're just going to continually get better. Don't try to take shortcuts. Actually be better at this. And then be ready to get knocked down and support yourself and prepare for that and have a network, have a team. Like I think if you do those, the details matter, and we talk a lot about the details and the running the numbers and the financing, but you can figure those out. Like those are learnable. Everything's figure outable. You can get it, and that's why I wrote the book. But I can't do those things for you. You have to do a lot of those yourself.
Yeah, no, well said. Yeah, it's a book I've read twice now. It's a book that I know on the 5th time that I read it, I'm going to be getting additional layers of value, because there's so much in this for us to take away. Again, regardless of where people are in their journey, if they're just starting, if they're in the meat of it, if they're, as you call it, an ender or somebody kind of harvesting the fruits of their labor in their portfolio, it's just an incredible book. And if I could just take a moment to just say that I and my wife and I are just so grateful for all that you've shared with us, and the mentor that you've been to us over our journey. I don't know that we would have bought rental properties without you being such a great support system. And so it's allowed us to have the life that we want and to just go on and be able to spend the time with our kids and things of that nature. So you've just been so incredible to us and to our family. So thank you so much for that. And tell us how we can get the book.
Well, the book is available right now. So on Bigger Pockets. And first of all, thank you for your kind words. That's why I do this. Like, honestly, like, you have to have a why for doing this Coach Carson thing as well. And sometimes I haven't been as clear on, like, what am I doing here? Like, should I be writing a book? Should I be doing a podcast? But the why is crystal clear to me. It's the small and mighty investor. And that's you, and that's Heather, and that's other people I get to meet. And I just feel super fortunate, like, to be a guide, to be like where people put their trust in you. Like, that's incredible. Like, wow, what a privilege to be able to do that. And so I feel very fortunate to have met you early in your career, and to be able to help to just add a little bit to what you're doing. You and Heather did the hard work, but the book, I hope, is going to be a start for people. It's going to be a guide. Like, this is a big book, by the way, everybody. This isn't your like little 200-page like tell you a little strategy. This is I think it's 376 pages, but it's got stories. It's readable. It's basically going to take you through the journey of, number one, like, what does it mean to be a small and mighty investor? Why should you think like this? And what's a big picture goal? So we actually work it backwards from your financial independence number. How much money do you want to make? And then we build a goal of how many properties you're going to need. That's going to be the starting point. And then that gets you into the meat of the book. And the meat of the book is, how do you find the deals? How do you finance them? How do you negotiate them? How do you manage them? How do you build systems? And I'm talking detailed stuff. Like, I shared the best I have on all of how I run my business and how I manage properties and how I finance properties. So it's all in there. Like, this for me is like, I don't want to write another book. Maybe I will one of these days, but I want to take a break from the book writing and let this be my book in the real estate space. And you can get it at Bigger Pockets. Bigger Pockets is my publisher. I'll have a link in the show notes or the podcast description. If you look below the podcast, I'll have a link in the YouTube description, and it'll take you to that page. Bigger Pockets is, you'll be able to buy it in another month if you're listening to this later, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, all the retailers as well. But we're selling it just on the Bigger Pockets page for the first month. So if you're early in the stage, help support us, support Bigger Pockets and me. That's the best, my number one recommendation. Go try to find it there. We have some cool bonuses there too that I've written a bonus chapter to the book about how to be a small and mighty investor in 2023. So some of the principles we talked about here, how do you adapt these principles in the book to the current environment? That's going to be a bonus you get if you go to the small and mighty investor at Bigger Pockets. And there's some other really cool bonuses. Like, for example, I talk a lot about in the book how I work a couple hours per week on my rental portfolio. And people are usually surprised by that, or they say, that's not true, whatever. And so I did a bonus where I showed the schedule, what my typical week looks like, actually having the calendar hour by hour. Here's what the week looks like. And I talk about how that works and what I do and what I don't do, and just kind of getting into the schedule of a small mighty investor. And then I have a exercise for you to do where you make your own ideal schedule. What do you want to fill your week with? And so there's some cool bonuses like that help you apply the lessons from the book, and those will be available on Bigger Pockets as well.
Phenomenal. Yeah, it's such a great read. And as you said, it is so readable, because it's one thing to have you dump your 20 plus years of knowledge and experience and teaching and being in the investing world, but to have it so digestible for us and have us be able to take the information and take action is a heck of a feat. So again, congratulations and incredibly well done on this. This is such a phenomenal book.
Well, thank you. It's gonna be fun to get out and meet people and share. I'm gonna be speaking at a little bit in person. Like, I'm gonna be speaking at the local Greenville club and my home club, just to sort of be my in-person, just sharing about the story. I'll be on some other podcasts as well. So my other ask is, if you like the book already, if you know you're buying it, if you can help share it and spread the word, that would be very appreciated. If you want to buy your Christmas presents early and buy 5 copies or 10 copies and give those to clients or friends or family members, that's the kind of thing I do with my favorite books. And I'd be honored if you thought this was a good enough book to do that. I would definitely appreciate that. My goal with it, books is yes, it's a business. You go out and sell the book, but it's got to be more than that to be, to really get the word out about it. For me, it's a movement. It's a community. It's something that I hope sparks the validation that, hey, you could be a small and mighty investor and do everything you want in life. Here's a blueprint. Here's how to do it. And my selfish motivation is I want other people to be living off the fruits of what I've been fortunate enough to benefit from, of owning properties, of doing this. I find the small and mighty investor in our society is an important peace. Like I'm big into my local community and trying to make it more walkable and bikeable. That's kind of my thing of making sidewalks and bike paths. And but I found that because I was in my community. I'm a local landlord. Like I know my tenants. I know what's going on with them. I know their frustrations. I'm living there as well. And even if you're a long distance investor, I find those of us who have small investors, we're just a different orientation to our communities than a big Wall Street investor who's a hedge fund and owns thousands of properties. Like it's kind of like a bank. This house is a number. That community is just a little dot on a map. Whereas small and mighty investors, we care about our community. Like we are there. Yes, we're making money, but we're adding value by making money, and we're figuring out what's the problems are in our community. And if we live there, we're the ones who are volunteering at the local planning commission, and we're the ones volunteering at the local churches, and we're the people who are picking up trash on the weekend. So this is part of a bigger idea for me, which is what I'm trying to hold myself to as well, is that community is huge. Like I have no idea how to fix a lot of problems on international and national scales, but I feel like we entrepreneurs can fix some things. We can solve some things in a little small way by providing affordable housing to people, by getting involved in our community, by making it a better place to live. Like housing is at the core of that. And I feel like small, mighty investors are a much better solution. It's your small store versus your Walmart. Sorry, Walmart. Like I feel like who really wants to get to know the local shopkeeper, the local restaurant, the local florist. Like those are the people who are our neighbors and our people we care about. I feel like the small and mighty investor is that version of the real estate world, and they're important. We're kind of the fabric of our community, and so if this book helps us spread that message and get more small and mighty investors, I feel like it's an important thing in our small way. So that's the movement. That's the idea. The benefit in the long run for you as well is that not only can you help your community, you can make money, you can free up your time, you can do all the things that matter to you as well. And I find that's enough. That's pretty cool. If we can all do that, then we can be happy with that.
That's phenomenal. It's cool to have somebody that has, let's be honest, stature in the investment community kind of validate what I think a lot of us deep down inside kind of know we want. And I think it also makes it more possible emotionally for those getting started to say, I think if I work really hard and I put time into it, I can acquire 5 or 10 rental units, versus if you get an ad on Facebook from Grant Cardone that's, if you're not making $40 million a year, you're garbage, and you need to step your game up, and this, that, and the other thing. For some people, that's their path, and for a lot of us, though, that doesn't really resonate. So thanks for kind of being that leader in this movement, and for helping us to understand that you can have what you want, and you don't have to be apologetic for not wanting to stay in a never-ending growth phase. So this is a really cool movement, and something that a lot of us are excited to be a part of. So again, thank you for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for doing this interview, Sean. This has been a lot of fun. You asked a lot of things that I don't think I would have gotten into on my own, so I know I wouldn't have. So this has been great. You should do this more often, Sean. Maybe you could start doing some podcasts on your own. What do you think?
Yeah. Again, I'll just follow your path. You
right.
showed us the way on rentals, and maybe I could follow your path to some degree on content as well.
Well, I will plant that seed. We're gonna sign off here, but I will plant the seed that in addition to the book, there's more coming in terms of community. I've been sort of taking a sabbatical in teaching, but I love teaching, and so the book is sort of my, here's the package, here's the blueprint, but there's also a space where people like learning from live, like learning from other people, having a community. So Sean and I are actually working on some things behind the scenes that will be really fun, and I hope very helpful. I've taught classes in the past, online classes about deal acquisition. I'm really excited to teach more the entire life cycle of a small, mighty investor, from getting started and having the right mindset and getting your time management right, to acquiring properties and the financing and how do you do that, and then actually managing and operating the property, down to the bookkeeping and how do you set up your QuickBooks and how do you have spreadsheets and systems and checklists. I'm a checklist nerd. So just to plant that seed for everybody, there's a lot more of that coming. We'll be announcing some more of that soon, but one step at a time. The book is the only thing I can handle in my mind at this time. But in the near future, there's also going to be some more opportunities that I'm excited about to share with you. So just be on the lookout for that. And we're going to have some cool people like Sean helping me out, because I can't do all this by myself. So Appreciate all of you listening. Thanks for being here on the podcast. It means a lot. If you're not on the newsletter already, the newsletter is a great place to stay in touch every week. I tell more behind the scenes stuff and announcements, what I'm doing, if I'm speaking different places on the book tour. I'm not doing a physical book tour yet, but I am doing a lot of speaking here and there and going to conferences. So check out the newsletter. That's at coachcarson.com/newsletter. I'll have a link to that in the show notes in the podcast as well. That's a great way to stay in touch and kind of join the small and mighty community, the Coach Carson community. And then I'll also have more podcasts coming out every week. So this is a special episode, but again, next Monday will be another regular episode. So thank you all for listening. See you next time. Have a great week. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.